Sean Newman podcast. Today I'm joined by Chris Elston, or his AKA Billboardchris, his Batman, your Bruce Wayne and your Batman at night kind of thing, except in broad daylight. So first off, thanks for hopping on, Chris.
Thanks, Sean. It's my pleasure to be here. We're going to talk about, I guess, what's a controversial subject that shouldn't be, and it's maybe a little confusing to some people. So I'm looking forward to just getting the bare facts out there.
Well, let's do this before we get into. Well, I mean, you can hop right into it, but why don't you give a little bit of your background on who you are, Chris, just so
Sure.
the audience can get a feel for who they're listening to.
Yeah, so I'm nobody. I'm just a dad. I have two girls. It's true though. I'm just a dad out in the suburbs who got tired of some nonsense going on. I have two girls. They're 9 and 12 years old. For most of my adult life, I was in the investment industry and also in the insurance business a bit. But like all parents, what I really care about is just my family, right? That's why we do all the things we do, working hard and all that sort of stuff, is to create a good world for our kids. And I learned about gender ideology being taught in our schools. I learned about this craze primarily affecting adolescent girls. And as a dad of girls, I wanted to learn more about what was going on, because we have this dramatic upsurge, huge increase in the numbers of girls who now say that they are boys because of some magical gender identity or some belief that there's such a thing as a boy brain or a girl brain. And a lot of these kids are physically trying to transition to the other sex, and they're being given really harmful drugs and hormones which alter their bodies permanently for something that's really just a craze that they're caught up in. So there's a whole lot to talk about on this subject, but really I'm just a concerned dad who learned too much and decided to take a stand. And so the first thing I did in September of 2020 was I put up a huge billboard in Vancouver that said, "I love J.K. Rowling." Yeah.
Why a billboard? Why not? I don't know. Everybody goes to social media. Why a billboard? Billboard almost feels old school.
Well, yeah, this has to go old school because we have to get out of our echo chambers and we have to reach people that aren't clued into this in our little social media networks. And what had happened was, in Scotland, there's a woman in the UK named Posey Parker who speaks out about a lot of the issues affecting women's rights in particular. And she put up this poster that said, "I love J.K. Rowling," at the Edinburgh train station. And they took it down the next day because some people on Twitter complained. And so for those who aren't up to speed on this at all, J.K. Rowling, of course, is the Harry Potter author. She's spoken out about some of these issues affecting not only women, talking about how women get fired from their jobs just for believing in biological reality, but she's also spoken out about this medical scandal affecting tens of thousands of kids. And so when this sign got taken down at the train station in Edinburgh, I had just had enough of our speech being canceled. And I'd had enough of all this absolutely insane censorship where you can't even say "I love J.K. Rowling." So I put up a big billboard, and it got ping bombed overnight after I tweeted out about it. And then a Vancouver politician, a woman named Sarah Kirby-Young, said it was hate speech. It has a big heart on it, Sean. But she said it was hate speech, and the sign company buckled to pressure, and they covered it up the next day. So then I put a whole bunch more up throughout the United States.
You know, Chris, the thing about hate speech, right? Like, obviously, the "I love J.K. Rowling" stands for more than that, but so does so much symbols in our world, right? It's funny what we sometimes allow and what we will not allow, right? And I just, I think it's Jordan Peterson who talks an awful lot about the hammer and the sickle, right? That that's become a rallying cry for part of the population as a socialist movement, and but they don't realize it stands for like the genocide of like millions of people in Russia. And what you're talking about is, so it's got "I love J.K. Rowling." Well, J.K. Rowling, to me, I'm sure a lot of listeners and a lot of people in North America, across the world, I mean, she's one of the best-selling authors of all time with her series, Harry Potter. I mean, that stands for itself. So just the words "I love J.K. Rowling," that shocks me that it can invoke so much anger out of somebody that they would go and do that. And not only that, that a politician or a person in political sway would deem it hate speech. You know, if that isn't what's been going on across the board with any type of issue right now with our politicians.
Yeah, it's kind of representative of how deeply we've fallen in a way when you can't just utter a basic true statement of love for a children's author. I'd happened to be reading Harry Potter every night all of last year with my little one. And I've been learning about all this gender stuff. And J.K. Rowling has never said anything transphobic of the sort. She's simply said things like women shouldn't be fired for believing in biological reality. And, you know, we shouldn't be sending rapists into women's prisons and things like that. Pretty common sense. And maybe we shouldn't sterilize kids who are 10, 11, 12 years old. Might also make a little bit of sense there. But yeah, this is a big crazy topic, and we have allowed ideologues to infiltrate our governments, our school unions, our schools, and we are teaching children sometimes that they might be born in the wrong body.
I understand why this is such a heavy topic, man. What an idea that is. This is why I wanted to have you on. Before we get to that,
Yeah,
absolute mouthful, I wrote down while you were talking your first couple ideas. The first thing you said was, "I'm just a nobody." I found that very interesting because I find right now it's a bunch of nobodies that are really pushing. Like we just got to get back to some good old fashioned values. Listen, Sean Newman. I'm sure you haven't heard of me. I'm sure I'm not on every billboard or every social media channel. I'm just a simple farm kid. Played some hockey. Just wants to do right by his community, his kids and his wife and everything else. And yet, I watch what's going on, and nobody wants to talk about these things, Chris.
yeah,
And that's a real danger because I've brought this thought up a couple times. Had Theo Fleury on maybe a month ago, and he got talking about Paul Brandt and child trafficking and his work in that. And I was like, what? And then Theo Fleury had this long spiel about what's happening to kids in not only the world, but Alberta specifically. Blew me away. Almost left me with a little bit of like a distaste in my mouth because I'm like, I can't believe this is happening in my province. And I went and listened to him and Paul Brandt had a podcast and listened to them. And Paul Brandt said, if we don't talk about it and shine a light on it, then it gets to continue to happen. And the longer you don't talk about it, they love operating in the shadows. And so I think we've all done a big disservice by, this topic in particular is one where I think if I look back on myself, I just go, oh yeah, you just want to let everybody be just let them do what they want to do. It's okay. It's not a big deal. And now I have young kids that are going to go to school and are going to have somebody say exactly what you just said. And they're going to have to wrestle with that. And even here sitting as a grown ass adult, I think about that and I go, man, what a complex idea that is.
Well, it's a complete myth is what it is. We should just dismiss it outright because there's obviously no such thing as being born in a wrong body. There's no such thing as a boy brain or a girl brain. This entire ideology hinges on stereotypes. So if a girl is a tomboy, more masculine, likes hanging out with the boys, likes playing football, likes wearing pants, likes playing in the dirt, likes STEM, likes engineering, whatever, all these traditional boy traits, these kids in many instances are being led to believe that they're really a boy inside, that they have a boy's gender identity. So we are teaching children that they all have a gender identity. So gender identity is a theory. It's something cooked up in academia. The term was first used in the 60s. But this is something that is sprung out of, these obscure academic ideas that really nobody cared about And we're now teaching this as fact from kindergarten on up, that every kid has a gender identity that may or may not coincide with their biological sex. And the entirety of this is based on stereotypes. So if a boy is more effeminate, well, chances are, when we look back at studies that have been done into gender dysphoria, so gender dysphoria is this condition where children or adults, they feel like their gender doesn't match with their sex. So gender is just a term used to describe the stereotypes, really, that go along with each of our sexes. You know, men tend to be more aggressive and whatever, and women are more compassionate. There's all these stereotypes. And of course, you get deviations all over the place because there's no right way to be a boy. There's no right way to be a girl. But this ideology is so regressive that if you look at the most used resource taught to children, it's this thing called the genderbread person. So it's an image of a gingerbread man, which of course we call a genderbread person because we don't want to give it a gender, right? But anyway, it's this genderbread person, and it states right on there, Sean, your gender identity is based on your personality, your job, your hobbies, your likes and your dislikes, roles, and expectations. So what would be a boy's role in society, or a man's role versus a girl's role? Well, who knows? Why are we going to these regressive sexist stereotypes? Like if a girl wants to be an engineer or she wants to play football and she hates wearing dresses, does that mean that puts her on the boy end of the spectrum? That's what this ideology teaches. They are trying to redefine boys and girls, men and women, to mean anything you want it to mean.
Why would they do that?
Activists with, well, first of all, there's a lot of money in this.
What do you mean?
Well, so kids who get confused about their gender identity, girls who are struggling. So this is primarily affecting young girls today. Historically, gender dysphoria, this feeling like a mismatch between your sex and your gender, the stereotypes that are associated with your sex. Kids with gender dysphoria used to affect boys. So maybe you'd have a 4 or 5 or 6-year-old boy who was way more effeminate, wanted to wear dresses. This was really rare. 1 out of every several thousand boys were affected by gender dysphoria, and way less than that for girls. We're talking 1 in less than 10,000. But what's happening today is in high schools, we have 7 to 10% of the kids saying that they're transgender, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. And the most vulnerable of these kids who have suffered trauma, who might have had abuse, who've had sexual abuse, a lot of these girls have suffered sexual abuse. About half these kids are on the autism spectrum. ADHD is super common. Depression and anxiety is very common. A lot of these kids, the kids in the foster system, are way overrepresented as being trans. Runaways, orphans, kids with eating disorders. There's always something else going on. And so if you take an example of a girl who is just having a really tough time in puberty, because it can really suck for girls, especially if they develop really early, oftentimes, and maybe there's been sexual abuse, or who knows, there could be a million things that precipitate this rapid onset gender dysphoria. If you give these kids an option to just opt out of their sex, well, especially with girls, a lot of them will just take you up on that option because it seems more attractive to them to be a boy, because then they don't have to deal with the harassment, they don't have to deal with their body changing so much, getting periods, all that sort of stuff. So it's kids that are struggling and kids who don't match the stereotypes associated with their sex. They're being led to believe that, well, maybe they were born in the wrong body and they're really a boy inside. And so what happens is the most vulnerable of these kids, they don't just change their name or pronouns. They end up at these gender clinics at the Children's Hospital. And the practice now at all of the children's hospitals across Canada is to simply affirm the child. This is called gender affirming care, or affirmation only. And the nurse or social worker who does the intake appointment simply affirms the child's self-diagnosis. If a girl says she's a boy, they go, all right, you are a boy. We're so glad you're finding yourself. You found your true self. And they will give this child a drug called Lupron, which is either an injection once a month or it's an implant that gets put in their upper arm or in their thigh. And these are, the technical term for this drug is it's a gonadotropin releasing hormone agonist. Gonadotropin hormone releasing agonists. And they stop the pituitary gland from releasing hormones, which in turn trigger testosterone in boys and estrogen in girls. So it's a puberty blocking drug. It stops puberty. It's a chemical castration drug. This is the same drug given to pedophiles to chemically castrate them, to destroy their sex drive. This drug was originally approved to treat prostate cancer. That's what the FDA approved it for, and to treat endometriosis, which is a uterine issue in women. But even for women, they don't go on this drug for longer than 6 months because the side effects are very harsh. But we'll give this to kids for the duration of their puberty, as soon as they enter puberty. So you got 10-year-old girls going on this drug. We're stopping bodies from developing for an ideology that teaches stereotypes define what they are. That's the first step. Puberty blockers are the first step. Second step, almost always, 98% of the time, according to Gender Clinic's own data, these kids go on to the next step, which is the opposite sex hormones. So let's look at this briefly. Real gender dysphoria starts young, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and it persists for years and years and years. We have studies into gender dysphoria, which traditionally affected way more boys than girls. All of our academic studies, if we look at the most recent one, they followed 139 boys for 20 years. 88% of these boys, 87.8% to be exact, when they went through puberty, their gender dysphoria simply went away. Because kids outgrow this. And the actual solution for gender dysphoria is their own hormones that come during puberty. So for boys, it's testosterone. That's what's going to help this feeling go away. But we stop that from happening, and then we give these boys estrogen, which, if anything, makes their dysphoria worse. And we give these girls testosterone. How long do you think girls have to stay on testosterone for once they start? For life. Testosterone causes vaginal and uterine atrophy. So after about 5 years, these girls are getting hysterectomies. They're getting oophorectomies. They're getting their ovaries removed. So now they'll never be able to produce their own estrogen for the rest of their life. And then they're reliant on a pharmaceutical company for life. And they grow beards, and they get deep voices, they get Adam's apples. Other stuff happens. I don't even want to get into it all. We have minor girls, even as young as 13 years old, getting double mastectomies. Because gender, surgeons will cut off their breasts for money. In Washington State, just yesterday, they passed a new law. All these minor children can now, they will be covered by their parents' insurance, but they don't even have to tell their parents that they're getting surgery. Gender affirming surgeries, all these insurance companies now have to cover them, but parental approval is not needed, not even for a 13-year-old. Parental knowledge is not even needed. We had a dad in BC last year went to jail because he spoke out against his daughter's transitioning. When she was 13 years old, she signed a consent form at the BC Children's Hospital to go on testosterone. The consent form literally states we do not have the long-term information associated with this treatment. So how can a child give informed consent when we don't even know all the bad things that are going to happen to these kids? Because this whole thing is experimental. There's never been a clinical study. This drug has never been approved by the FDA for this purpose. It's being used off-label. Sweden and Finland have stopped this practice, and they say that the only way kids can do it again is if they're part of a clinical trial. But this whole thing, gender dysphoria is supposed to be persistent and last for years. And it's transitioning is something we do. It's not something we are. There really is no such thing as being trans. All that means is that you wish to transition physically to appear more like the other sex, to hopefully alleviate this gender dysphoria. But that's not what's happening today anymore. We have kids that didn't grow up with gender dysphoria. They get into high school, and there's all these teachings now. They're all taught that they have a gender identity, and it's all based on stereotypes. And so it's all these kids who are having a tough time. They feel like they don't fit in. Maybe these girls are more masculine. Their friends will even tell them, oh, you're probably trans because you're more masculine. And what's going on in high schools today is when you come out as trans, you get celebrated. And of course, we want all these kids to be loved. But celebrating a delusion causes these kids to feel good because now they're getting celebrated. They're getting a lot of attention. They'll get a ton of likes on social media. They get love bombed at their schools. And the practice also in these schools, where this gets really insane, is a child can change their name and pronouns at school. They can come out as trans, but it is policy. It is the British Columbia Teachers Federation's policy. I'm sure it's the same in Alberta, not to tell the parents their child has changed their name at school unless the kid consents. So your little 10-year-old who was Henry and is now Henrietta, the whole school will know, the administrators know, the teachers know, but the parents have this hidden from them. That case I was just telling you about, the dad who went to jail, he didn't find out his daughter's name had changed until he read her yearbook at the end of the year and saw a different name for his own child.
Fuck, you know how to make a guy uncomfortable sitting here for, it's only been like 15 minutes. And I'm like, oh, this is, I guess the first question I have, it's the uncomfortable conversation is not a problem. I just, it's, you know, we're not talking McDavid scoring the big goal, right? Like this is conversations that need to happen. Parents need to understand they need to take an active role in their kid's life, right?
Yeah.
Is this happening everywhere? And what I mean by that is, you mentioned Sweden and Finland. I'm talking, you mentioned Sweden and Finland. This isn't happening, which I find interesting in itself.
Well, it was happening there, but they've just recently stopped giving these puberty blockers to kids under 16 years of age because there's no evidence to support it.
Are all, so is, I don't know, I'll throw, is Russia doing this? Is China doing this? Is, I don't know, is
Russia is not doing this. And I've been on TV in Russia a couple of times talking about this. China, I read just the other day, they just opened their first gender clinic. But obviously this is not a major thing going on in China yet. And my own inkling is I don't think it will take off there. But this is happening in every
you bring it
country in the
you
Western
bring it
world.
close, you bring it close to home, right? I'm Canada. Yeah. I'm the Western provinces. I'm Alberta, Saskatchewan, right smack on the border. Okay. And I go, you know, I go back to what I was saying to you before we started and how you came across my plate. I got talking to a group of teachers, and I just, you know, don't have kids that, I don't know. I've had this discussion lots with the book club I'm a part of, and I just, you know, you never think it's that close to home. So, and, you know, I don't know, maybe a fringe issue, maybe something that's happening in the big cities or something, because, you know, we're not a big city by any stretch. And then you get talking to teachers and it's happening. You're like, oh, really? Yeah. Like, I just don't really. And you start talking about it and you go, what are we doing? Like, to me, yeah, like our society in Canada in particular, we want everyone to feel loved, and we want everyone to win, and we want everybody to be safe. Everybody can be loved, but after that, everyone cannot, to wrap everybody in a bubble suit, you're still going to cause complications. To have everybody win, well, some people win, some people lose. That's the game of life, right? You have to look at things for what they are. I'm trying to wrap my brain around this, and I'm sure I'm going to have some teachers or some people just come at me because they're like, well, you got to understand, little Billy, he's different. Like he's
Okay,
different.
that's great. So celebrate his differences. Celebrate gender nonconformity. To be gender nonconforming is totally fine. Why does Billy have to be masculine? Why are we going to try to change Billy's body to match stereotypes? Just because Billy's more feminine doesn't mean he should have a micropenis for life. Because what happens when you give these kids puberty blockers, their penis won't grow. Girls' breasts don't grow. Girls' hips won't get wider. Their bones won't gain any density. And in fact, these children are losing bone density. I talked to a mom in California just a month ago. Her daughter was on puberty blockers from 12 to 15 years of age. She lost 11% of her bone density. They did bone scans each year. This is when bones are supposed to be getting way stronger. A girl in Sweden just suffered spinal fractures and has osteopenia because she was on these puberty blocking drugs. So when I talked about that study earlier, and I said 88% of these boys that were followed for 20 years simply outgrew their dysphoria when they hit puberty. 64% of them grew up to be gay. They were really effeminate. It persisted for years and years. Not a big surprise. The majority grew up to be gay. But what these ideologues try to do is they try to conflate sexual orientation and gender identity as though these are the same things. And it's totally different. This is not the new gay rights movement. Gay rights is about who you love. It's who you're attracted to. And people are attracted to who they are attracted to. This is telling people that they're actually the other sex just because they don't adhere to society's stereotypes.
They play with a truck or a doll or
right.
what have you.
Right. So then you end up with these 18-year-old boys with a 1-inch penis. And if they want to get a vagina, what they'll do is they invert the penis to make a neo-vagina. But because there's not enough tissue, because it never formed properly, they will cut out this boy's stomach lining or a piece of his colon to make the lining for this neo-vagina. And it smells, and there's all sorts of surgical complications, and people get really ill. There's all sorts of other grotesque things I'm not even going to get into.
Have you talked to a doctor who does this?
I've had an endocrinologist come up to me on the street before and start debating me, but he didn't last very long. He kind of ran away. I've talked to doctors who had no idea this was going on. I've got a podcast coming out soon with a couple of doctors in Texas, which I'm really looking forward to. I've talked to lots of nurses. I've talked to a doctor who was in med school who recently took out the uterus of an 18-year-old girl just because she wanted it taken out because of gender. They used to not, well, they still won't actually tie the tubes of women when they're like 28 years old because they say they don't want to have more kids, because doctors know that a lot of women change their mind.
Well, hey, I'm a guy. I'll sit right here and I'll tell you the story. Yeah. So we had our first kid and I didn't want to have a second. Then we had our second. And then I was damn sure I didn't want to have a second. I went in to the doctor and said, all right, got him up. I just give me the snip. And they said, I tell you what, give it 6 months and let's talk again. And I'm so thankful they did that, because what happened, we had our third and we had complications. I won't get into the long story of it. We're done at 3, but if I could have a fourth, I would. It's something with age that you just is a thing of beauty, right? As you get older, you just start to understand things. And, you know, you go back to being a kid, like you just don't understand the consequences of what you're doing at 18, let alone 25, let alone 30, let alone 5 years old or 10 years old. Like you just have, that's what parents, you're supposed to be getting guided. You're supposed to be getting, you know.
Parents can't stop it. Okay, so a woman I talked to, a mother in Victoria, in September of 2020, she just moved there. She had an 11-year-old daughter. Now, she just separated from her husband. So that's traumatic for these kids, of course, when parents separate. Just moved to a new city. The daughter has since been diagnosed with ADHD and depression. But on the first day of school, this teacher in Victoria, and Victoria is the worst, by the way, in Canada for this. It's absolutely insane over there. But
Victoria, BC,
yeah. The whole island is way more left-wing, right? But first day of school, the teacher asked the kids for their preferred name and pronouns. This girl developed really young. She had double D's when she was 10 and a half years old. That's really hard for girls. And she just was having a terrible time in life. And she decided right then and there that she was a boy. And so she was sent to the counselor at the school. The counselor was coaching her on how to get binders. So chest binders, they're these really tight compression sleeves that crush their breasts down and even cause damage. And the counselor at the school was coaching the girl where to get these without her mom knowing, hiding things from the parents. Mom found out, talked to the principal. Long story short, the girl was doing better after nearly a year. And at the end of the last school year, this girl wasn't getting outside counseling anymore. She was doing better. And the school counselor found out she wasn't getting any outside counseling and contacted the Ministry of Children and Families. So the social workers called up the mom, who's a wonderful woman, liberal, by the way. Not that that means anything, but you know, she's not one of these stereotypical conservative parents that would be all against this. Like, that's not who she is, right? And the social worker told her that if she's not affirming her child's name change and pronouns, that they consider it abuse. And they could take your kid away. And we've already seen this happen in other jurisdictions. So she had to meet, the girl had to meet with the social worker on her own, so did mom, so did the dad. And it was all fine. The girl handled the interview fine and she's doing better, and they closed the file. But that is scary as hell.
With the mom, did you ask her, you know, just as a parent sitting here with 3 kids, you go, so many thoughts come to mind, Chris, right? Like I just have so many thoughts, right? Like you go, is it where we're at in society? Is it all these different things? Is it the divorce rate? Is it dual income families where both, you know, in order to survive in our world, more and more, you have to have both parents working full time. And, you know, you hear the older generations talk about, you need to be around your kids, you need to be involved, you need to teach, blah, 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 right? And so part of me wonders, are those contributing factors? Part of me wonders if there were other things at play. And I just, you know, with the mom in particular, where this is the extreme is happening, is there things that have come out of it or from others you've talked about that, you know, you kind of get a, oh, well, maybe people should be cautious or pay attention to this?
Yeah, so I've talked to probably a couple hundred parents across Canada and a lot in the US as well. I have kids, young adults and kids come up to me almost every day when I'm out on the street, because I wear these signs and I go out on the street. I go to busy events and I go to busy street corners. I hang out downtown Vancouver, and I've been traveling across Canada several times. Even got my arm broken getting attacked by Antifa one day. But I just have conversations with people. And so lots of these kids come up to me too. And they're all struggling. All these kids have something else going on. There's always some comorbidity. A girl came up to me in Ontario. She had like 30 cut marks up and down her arm. A lot of these girls, they're involved in cutting. They have eating disorders. It's the same girls who were struggling with anorexia in the past are now coming out as trans. And they're trying to escape whatever is bugging them in life. And we have, this is all by design. So we have activists, trans activists, gender ideologues, whatever you want to call them, who have been very successful with a very coordinated campaign that's deeply funded in getting this ideology into our schools and
When-
into our corporations. We have all these woke ideologues who are elected in politics. And so it culminates with things like this bill that just passed in Canada, Bill C4, which is a conversion therapy bill. So in this upside down world, what the federal government has just done is they've made it a criminal offense to counsel these children who are struggling with gender identity issues. Because if you help a child feel comfortable as their sex, that is considered conversion therapy. It's totally fine to take a girl who's comfortable being a girl, teach her a bunch of nonsense in school, and have her convinced now that she's a boy. That's not conversion therapy. That is somehow her finding her true self. But it's conversion therapy to then help this girl feel comfortable as she is and keep her off puberty blockers, opposite sex hormones, and keep her out of the surgeon's office where they will amputate her breasts. That's considered conversion therapy. So this bill has two components. It's got sexual orientation. And you know what? 99.9% people agree we shouldn't try to change gay people. You know, we shouldn't be doing that because you love who you love. This is something totally different. This is a denial of biological sex. And it's obviously wrong, but we're not allowed to talk about it. And we're supposed to just accept that people have all these gender identities that are opposite from their biological sex, and that the only way they'll be truly happy is if we alter their bodies as children. And parents are told, if you don't let your kid transition, you have two choices. You can have a dead kid or a trans kid, because they're taught that there's this huge suicide rate among kids if you don't let them transition. And it's a despicable lie. I can prove it. I've got all sorts of materials on my website. If you go to billboardchris.com, click on the section called puberty blockers, then click on the section called studies. I've got all the studies, academic studies, into how many of these kids grow out of it. It's 80 to 90%. And we're talking traditional gender dysphoria, not this new craze. This is all something new. But it's not true that these kids will kill themselves if you don't let them transition. Obviously, it's not true. We've been around as a human race for a couple 100,000 years. No one was killing themselves because they were born in the wrong body. This is a brand new cult. This is a religion. This is the gender religion. And it teaches our kids that they have a gendered soul. So your body doesn't matter. It's this inside, which is entirely dependent upon stereotypes. So this is just the stupidest thing all around. But it's not just dumb. It's extremely medically harmful. We are sterilizing thousands of children. This isn't a fringe issue. We have one psychologist in BC named Wallace Wong, who works for the Ministry of Children and Families. He himself gave a talk at the Vancouver Public Library where he says he's transitioning over 1,000 children. His youngest patient is 2 years and 9 months old.
Is how old?
2 years, 9 months. So he believes children are born in the wrong body. So if a boy's more effeminate, that must mean he's a girl. And he'll send these kids to the children's hospital, who then only affirm the child and give them these drugs and hormones.
I fucking have a 5, a 4, and a 2-year-old. You know how many times the 3-year-olds walked around going, "Hey, I'm a boy. She's a girl." And it's like,
sure,
that's what kids do.
Yeah. But if you're a crazy parent and you start affirming that, well, sure, now your boy's or your girl's going to believe she's a boy if you keep telling her she's a boy. And then if you raise her as a boy, and then she's going to, you get parents like that too. You get those nutty parents, but more and more, this isn't nutty parents. This is schools and social media indoctrinating our kids.
This is so much bigger than even schools, though. You've hit on a couple words that, like, this isn't. I'm married to a teacher. I know a lot of teachers. I'm sure you know a lot of teachers. There is I'm
married to a teacher.
There you go. There's a ton of great human beings that are teachers. I would go back to probably the 99% are, or whatever the percent you want to be. It's a highly high. It's a high number. But you've mentioned the word deep. This is a deep problem. Like this isn't a simple solution of just like, or maybe it is. Maybe you have a solution, and I'll give you all the time in the world to talk about a solution, because I really enjoy solutions instead of just, and what you're doing, exposing and just talking about it. And man, it cannot be easy to walk in your shoes, or maybe it is. I don't know. I look at, like, I'm a sports guy, Dwayne Wade, you know,
Me too.
And his wife, they have, what was the quote I read? We literally are learning from our 12-year-old.
Right.
Charlize Theron had the 3-year-old. You know, those are just pop culture icons. And I'm sure I'm missing a whole whack of different ones now. So it's, you talk about social media, but it's like, from the celebrity people that are worshipped in our society, they're affirming this. I mean, Caitlyn Jenner was the woman of the year, was she not?
Oh yeah. Women. The winner of Best Actress at the Golden Globes a couple days ago is a man. We have this University of Pennsylvania swimmer. This guy's like 6'2", destroying all the women in the pool. He just won the 1500 meters by 38 seconds, lapped everyone a couple times. And then he actually just lost a race to a trans man, another college race. So this is a woman transitioning to male. Who knows if she's on testosterone or not? She says she's not, but anyway, this stuff is, when you get this into the school system, that's the ultimate win for these ideologues, because now they get to indoctrinate an entire generation of our youth. And if we're graduating 1 million kids every year who believe that children are born in the wrong body, and trust me, kids believe this, because I get yelled at by young adults constantly when I'm on the street. The under 25 demographic, especially the females, they have bought into this. So what happens is you indoctrinate them in school. These kids are victims. They are victims of indoctrination in school and on social media and in society and media at large, right? They're being indoctrinated. They go to university. This stuff's totally insane in university. They don't even have women's studies classes anymore. They call them all gender studies. They don't even teach that there's breastfeeding in medical school at UBC anymore. They call it chest feeding because they don't want to exclude the men who give birth as well. I'm not making this up. They can't even call them women. They call them individuals with a cervix, or chest feeders, or people with a uterus. CNN, the UN for Women, the ACLU, all these organizations are completely captured by this ideology. They've all been infiltrated by activists. They spend $450 million a year on LGBT issues in North America, but that's almost entirely T, because gay rights were won. And what happens with these organizations, which start off with great goals, is they accomplish their goals, but now they're supporting an entire infrastructure. They're supporting all these people financially. They have to keep going. They have all this money still pouring in. And so all this money turned to transgender issues. And it's gotten away from reality. This is reality's last stand. If we have a society that believes men and women don't really exist, and that your sex is just a choice, and that puberty is just an option, well, we have a serious disaster on our hands. And these kids honestly believe puberty is just an option. A lot of these kids. I'll get young people telling me, if children can't consent to puberty blockers, how can they consent to puberty? It's like saying, how can you consent to breathing? Or how can you consent to your heart beating? This is a natural process. Blocking puberty is insane. It's evil. I don't care what the ideology is. Forget about all the trans stuff. Just forget about everything. We're blocking puberty in kids. There's no excuse for that. We're giving them the wrong hormones, which alter their bodies for life, causes cancer, causes cognitive development, causes heart disease.
Why is it we can't see past the end of our nose? Why you talk about all these things? I agree with you, right? Like if you take away a bunch of whatever, you just go, we're giving a bunch of kids stuff that we can't figure out what it's going to do to them 5 years down the road, let alone 10 years, 15 years. Don't take the mental side of this into it, just the body side of it. I go, how is that even remotely legal? But as a society, we have a really, really hard time seeing very far into the future.
People are afraid to be seen as anti-trans. All the media articles about me call me anti-trans or transphobic. They don't even know what my position is. When I was in Ottawa in October, 200 university students came out to mob me, punched me in the head, painted on me, keyed my car. Police all just watched. All the media reported it as being transphobia and everything. But when they actually sat down and talked to me, CBC talked to me for 18 minutes on camera. Same thing with CTV. They didn't report a single second of our interview because all they were doing was looking for something hateful coming out of my mouth. And they found nothing. So they reported nothing. And you get these politicians, you get these city councilors that came out to see me and all that sort of stuff, railing against me with the media. But when asked, what do you know about this guy? They have nothing. They know nothing. They say anti-gay, anti-trans. My biggest supporters, a lot of them are from the gay and lesbian community. Because a lot of gay and lesbian adults, when they grew up, were gender non-conforming, right? Men were more feminine. The women, lesbians, were more masculine, a lot of them. This is who this ideology is coming for as kids, but it's grown beyond that. It's now all these kids with autism and ADHD and depression and anxiety, girls who have suffered sexual abuse. Why do girls get sexually abused? Because they're girls. If they can escape being a girl by transitioning, they think their problems are going to go away. That's happening. I follow all these kids that are detransitioning, all these young adults who are now in their early 20s, who don't have their breasts anymore, who have deep voices, who have a beard, these girls. And they have deep regrets. And they're saying, what the heck did you do to me? I went to get help. And I was fast-tracked and pushed down this gender treadmill. No one questioned anything. They just affirmed all of my own false beliefs about myself. They cut my breasts off and they altered my body for life. And now I can't even have kids. This is the biggest child abuse scandal in modern medicine history. It just is. And it's one that nobody will talk about because they're afraid of being called a bigot or something. Well, but there's nothing bigoted about protecting kids. Parents need to start standing up and taking some action because it can't just be a handful of us.
Yeah, well, here you won't get silenced. Believe me, YouTube will do that for us both enough.
They keep me on.
Well, good for you. They don't seem to like me in my recent track record, but hey, what are you going to do? So, I feel like then there's some hope because I find tons of people no longer listen. I mean, don't get me wrong, mainstream media is still doing what it's doing, but the trend, the everyone is moving away from it. Like everybody's seeing that they don't, I had, on a completely different subject, Mike Kuzmiskas. He's come up an awful lot on this, and people who've been listening to me will hear that name an awful lot because he's I-Corps Blood Services. They did a bunch of testing on Lacrete, a small community in northern Alberta who has the lowest vaccination rate. Now, we don't need to get into right, wrong, anything. Just on the story itself, he basically proved through blood tests that they got like 89% infection or antibodies in the community that isn't vaccinated. It's like, it's a good news story. What did CBC do? Railroaded them. And it's like, well, why? Don't we want out of this? Don't you want your parents to have, and I'll bring it back to you. Like, I honestly, I got a few questions towards the end because I really want to know some research for parents to do if they want to get some additional, books or maybe a couple different speakers, that type of thing. Like any resources you can provide, I think would be, as a parent, I think on any subject, in order to talk openly about it, you have to be confident in it. And it's really, really tough. So I admire your conviction. I really do. You mentioned Antifa and then you mentioned Ottawa beating the hell out of you. I find it really interesting, our news media in this country in particular, CBC, global, I mean, across the board, the mainstream media, the corporate media, man, they don't want to touch certain subjects. And it's like, well, why? Like, isn't that what journalism is all about? Like at times, yeah, you're not going to, if you don't get it right, then you interview somebody else and you keep building on the story. You let people come along for the ride to see, oh, no, well, that was okay. Well, let's try from this. And like, because you don't come off as extreme at all, Chris. Actually, you come off as a pretty well-spoken guy. I just go, man, there is a ton to this that is really uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with it, which if I'm willing to bring you on and talk about it, imagine how many people in the audience are like, ugh, I don't, man, that's too much for me. I'm at it. And it's like, and that's the problem is somehow we've allowed, because this is going to affect all of our kids. It's going to affect my kids, whether or not directly or just a teacher or another child or whatever. Somehow they're going to come into close proximity of these thoughts, these ideologies. And that's, I think every parent needs to understand that.
Yeah, and parents really need to understand what's happening on social media as well, because all these teenagers are on social media. They're on TikTok, they're on Tumblr, they're on YouTube. There's this website called DeviantArt that a lot of artsy kids end up at, and it's just groomer central. There are ideologues on all of these sites advertising this stuff to kids. TikTok, there are tons of teen influencers. So who's more influential over teens than other teens, right? Nobody. And there's all these teen influencers trying to convince these kids that they're trans. You have entire peer groups of girls coming out as trans. And parental rights are being taken away. It's gotten so crazy that governments have all introduced laws and are introducing more laws all the time to take away parental rights to speak up against this. This man who went to jail because he was violating a court order not to speak out against his daughter's transition. He was talking to conservative websites and stuff in the States, and a judge gave him a gag order, so he couldn't even speak out. He kept defying the gag order, so they threw him in prison for 6 months.
Holy shit. Here's a question for you.
Trying to protect his kid.
What, you've been on foot patrol doing this.
Yeah, I've been arrested twice too.
Here's maybe a dumb question. Why keep doing it then? Why get your ass kicked? Right? You said broken arm. Maybe you didn't have your ass kicked.
I didn't get my ass kicked.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
I got a broken arm.
Broken arm. You go to Ottawa, you get mobbed, right?
Yeah.
To most people, don't mean ass kicked. Yeah,
I'm just teasing you. That's fine.
I just mean you're putting yourself in harm's way. Like really, by talking to the guests I do, I put myself in this weird harm's way in a sense that people treat me different and it's uncomfortable. That is uncomfortable. But what you're talking about is literally physically, like now you're in harm's way. Why continue to do that?
Because we're harming thousands of kids, Sean. What's the point of life? Is it to make money, get a house with a pool? It's not my point of life. Knowing what I know, I decided I could not sit still and be quiet about it because I wasn't comfortable looking back in 40 years and going, oh yeah, I knew all that was happening and I just didn't do anything. So I'm just taking a stand as a normie who has never done anything activist related in my life. But I have girls, and at first I was setting out to make sure I was protecting them by getting up to speed. But I'm not going to be the guy that stays quiet while thousands and tens of thousands of kids across the world are getting sterilized and lied to, and everyone's too afraid to have a conversation. Why can't we have a conversation? None of these ideologues will talk to me. They're all welcome to come on my YouTube channel anytime and show me how wrong I am. None of them will. None of them will even have a conversation. When I get mobbed in Ottawa or in Prince George recently, they just chant and shout the same mantras, trans rights are human rights. Well, of course, trans rights are human rights. I agree. They're humans. They have the same rights any other human has. That's not my issue. They don't even know what my issue is. And they don't want to talk about it because they don't want their bubble to burst. Because all these liberals, all these progressives think they're so woke, that they're so inclusive and accepting, that they're just letting these children be who they really are. Sorry, but that's cuckoo. Girls aren't really boys. And that's not controversial, but somehow it is today. And somehow it's controversial to speak out against medical child abuse. It's somehow controversial to speak out against sterilizing 12-year-olds. We are not doing mental health assessments of these children. They treat all these other comorbidities. They treat the depression, the anxiety, and everything as though that's caused by being born in the wrong body. No, this feeling of wanting to escape their sex, address these other issues first. Address the underlying mental health problems. Address the abuse. Address the trauma. Do counseling. But now we can't even counsel these kids because they just passed a law calling it conversion therapy. So all these counselors now are afraid to treat these kids. And if you're a therapist treating kids with gender dysphoria, your business is booming because there's way more kids. If every therapist in Canada focused on gender dysphoria, we still wouldn't have enough to do proper mental health assessments for all these kids. But these counselors, it's simply a matter of time until some activist comes along and says they're trying to convert the kids' gender identity from trans to cisgender, this made-up term, cisgender, meaning you are your gender the same as your sex. But this whole system is now set up to fast track and push these kids along this sex change treadmill. We are trying to change the sex of children.
Have you come across any solutions?
Yeah, the solution is to have these conversations and spread awareness. And we don't need 20% of the population to become aware. We need like 3% of the population to become aware. Because this is so crazy. When people start learning what's going on, like I guarantee yourself, this isn't going to be the last you learn of this today. It's on your radar now. And over time, you're going to learn a bit more and a bit more. And you're going to be more and more in disbelief. And you're going to speak out about it more. And this will grow.
You remind me of a guy named Roger Hodgkinson. He was a doctor on here, and listeners will remember that. And I just remember just how direct you are is how direct he was. And he said, sometimes you just can't tango or dance an issue, right? Where you just want to kind of like dance around it. Like sometimes you gotta deal with it. You gotta run right into it. And what you're doing to me is I'm going, oh, what's the point of life? You raise a very, very, very hard question, right? To a lot of people. It's very direct. Where's your line? Where is the line? Right? Everybody's got one. Nobody thinks about it. What's the point of life? I don't know. What is the point of life? That's a deep question. But at some point, you got to get on board or figure out what it is, because if you can, then all of a sudden it becomes a pretty powerful question. And you're giving me a lot to chew on. I think you're giving the audience a lot to chew on. We've been down our own rabbit hole the last little bit. And when I got into these conversations, I was fascinated to talk to you. And I mean that in the best way, because obviously I'm not fascinated at the issue, just at the opportunity to see and hear from a guy who's walking the talk. And that's very rare, I think, in our society. Most people want to talk about it and not do anything, or most people want to just ignore that it's even there.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're failing our kids. I'm not a religious guy. People assume I am. But like all these Christian pastors, they're all failing. They're not talking about it. Maybe they got burned too much by opposition to gay rights, and they feel like they can't speak about this. This isn't the new gay rights movement. That's what these ideologues want you to believe, that this is the same sort of thing, that this is just about accepting people. No. So adults, if an adult wants to transition because their dysphoria, this terrible feeling, is persistent, and they think they'll be happier presenting as the opposite sex. And they have become informed about all the risks and everything, and they want to transition, go for it. Transition is something you do, it's not something you are. But ideologues have succeeded in framing this as a core identity issue, when all it is about not conforming to stereotypes. And so adults, if they want to transition, I hope they're happy. A lot of them will warn against this. A lot of them are warning against this, and a lot of them are disgusted. A lot of the transgender community are disgusted that we are doing this to children. So this is an issue that we should be able to talk about. It should be getting talked about on national media. CTVW5, shortly after I was in Ottawa, actually released a little documentary where they did focus on both sides a little bit. They talked to Sinead in Scotland, who's a detransitioner, and they talked to a young person who's so far happy with their transition. But that was also a case, the person who was happy, that was a case of genuine gender dysphoria from a really young age. And that person transitioned in their late teens. I still think that they should wait until they're at least 18. But that was a very different scenario than what's going on today, because the guidelines for this, the way that hospitals and gender clinics treat this has changed dramatically just in the last couple of years. It's all towards affirmation only, no questioning. And so you get these kids in the States, they'll walk into a Planned Parenthood, they'll walk out of there 20 minutes later with their testosterone. They know nothing about these children. At the Children's Hospital in Eastern Ontario, CHEO, when I was there last year, this young girl went in, she was there for 20 minutes. She came out with puberty blockers. Tell me, what does a doctor know about a child after 20 minutes? Nothing. They've looked into nothing. And if you look at the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which is not the governing body, but it's this organization who write guidelines that these gender clinics are supposed to follow. They themselves say that they shouldn't be giving opposite sex hormones to these kids until they're at least 16. But all our hospitals just ignore that. They're giving opposite sex hormones to kids when they're 13. And so that just makes the dysphoria worse. And now you end up with, you know, people who are kind of between sexes because they never developed. The Romans used to castrate boys to make them into eunuchs. Well, this is the same thing. It's just a chemical castration.
I want you to do me a favor. I listened to you and Zuby talk. I enjoy Zuby. And you talked about Aaron O'Toole. And I found, for a Canadian, that story fascinating, because if I think as a leader, you cannot run from the difficult conversations. Actually, I would say by running from the difficult conversations, what's happened across our society is exactly what you get, right? Like, you need leaders to stand up for and talk about the difficult conversations. So for all my conservative brethren and people that are voting the conservative way, you got to share the story of Aaron O'Toole and your dealings with him.
Yeah, I have this on video too, if anyone wants to see it, because they don't believe me. But
where do they
I've
go?
been
YouTube?
to Ottawa.
YouTube?
I haven't posted it. I posted it on Twitter back in the day.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll upload it to my YouTube channel. I got a bunch of stuff to upload, but I was in Ottawa. I've been there 5 times in the past year and a bit. And I stand in front of the West Block, which is where the House of Commons is. And there's only one entrance in. So I stand out on the street. It's about 50, 100 feet from the entrance. And Aaron O'Toole was coming back from lunch down on Sparks Street. And he hit the button at the crosswalk to cross towards where I was, right in front of the entrance. He looked up and he saw me. He was with 3 of his aides. And of course, they were all wearing masks outside because, you know. He saw me, he muttered something to his assistants, and then he walked the wrong way. He went, instead of straight, he went left to the next block. So what's that, 200 yards away? So I just crossed the street on the other side. I just walked along the sidewalk on the other side, and I met him at the next crosswalk because he was just trying to avoid me. So it was almost 100 degrees outside. It was a heat wave in May, and Aaron O'Toole walked 300 or 400 yards extra to get to the entrance because he walked the wrong way down the street, crossed the street, refused to talk to me, and then he doubled back all the way up the ramp back to the entrance he was already at. This is the conservative leader of Canada. There could not be a more conservative message than the sign I was wearing, which said, "Children cannot consent to puberty blockers." He can't even have a conversation. He can't even walk by me. What's he conserving? All he conserves is Trudeau's latest policies. This is what's called queer theory taking over our society. You've got critical race theory, you've got these different critical theories, you've got queer theory, which basically is deconstructing all the sexual and gender norms. You know, everything's a go. They want to reduce the age of consent for everything. They want to include minor attracted persons or MAPS in the LGBTQ2SIA plus. You know, it's all part of the same thing. Stripping away the boundaries, stripping away common sense, stripping away kids' innocence. You can be whatever you want to be. There's no such thing as biological sex. There are more than two sexes, they teach as well, which is another complete falsity.
I'm learning this lesson, and that lesson is this: that in order for things to change, I mean, obviously, a small part of the population can push what they want, and if they're well formed and planned and have money behind it, we're seeing that can really happen. But I've found that the majority of population probably doesn't want majority of things that are happening to it, but we don't talk about it. We talk about sports. We talk about, I don't know, immeasurable amount of things that mean a hill of beans in the grand scheme of things. And if I've learned anything over the last year for sure, maybe less, is I find more important conversations happening, which allows more and more lessons to be learned, confidence to be gained to talk about different subjects and feel okay in your stance on it. Because I think even, not that long ago, I was still wishy-washy on a lot of things. But as things move along, I have a real hope that the more of the general population is going to start to understand these things, because these chats are happening. Yeah. And more people are starting to realize that a 2-minute segment on CBC probably isn't going to give you a clear picture in what on earth is going on. And as more of this becomes mainstream per se, and people start to see the impacts of it, it's going to have to be a conversation. And I admire people such as yourself with such conviction to continue pushing and talking to different people and speaking very bluntly. And I mean that in the best way. I think it's a lost art of being able to just speak blunt, honestly.
Yeah, it's just honesty. I'm happy to be wrong about anything. I love being wrong. Not a lot of people love being wrong. I love being wrong because that's how you learn things. And I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone, anytime, without even preparation. I'll have anyone on. But none of them want to have these conversations. The government doesn't want to have these conversations, but they know what's happening. Someone last year went in and spoke to the whole Conservative caucus in Ottawa. I know this for a fact, all about all these issues. I've spoken with some MPs outside Ottawa, some Saskatchewan ones as well, and Alberta boys. They know exactly what's happening.
And what do they say?
So one said it's probably going to take us 10 years to undo this. And I said, no, that's no good.
That's
like, fuck. I'm not, yeah. But then they all voted yes to this bill that just passed unanimously. The Senate decided to fast track it and not even have hearings. Not even to talk about it. Then they were all hugging and dancing, celebrating themselves because they appear to the uninformed as though they're this great inclusive government, for the LGBTQ community. That is not a community. We need to stop phrasing it like that. There's LGB, that's sexual orientation. There are lesbians, they have their own community. There are gay men, they have their own community. This isn't some big community. And a lot of these people who call themselves trans as kids would just grow up to be gay. But now we're ruining their bodies. I did a podcast with a man named Artie Morty. He's on Twitter, Artie Morty. He's a gay man in Toronto. I did a podcast with him the day after I got my arm broken in Montreal. And when he was a kid, he had gender dysphoria. He wanted to be a girl. He 100% would have been transitioned if he was growing up today. And he wouldn't have had the chance to grow up into the beautiful gay man that he is. And this is what we're doing to kids. And not all these kids are going to grow up to be gay or lesbian either, because what's happening today is something brand new. This is a brand new craze that's really exploded in the last 5 years. And now this ideology is in schools, and it's just going to keep exploding as long as it's in schools. And social media, honestly, parents, you got to be aware of social media, because so many kids are falling down these internet rabbit holes, and it's messing up their brains. So they don't need social media.
Go watch The Social Dilemma. That one I'll.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that isn't on exactly anything. That one's that one should be for adults too, right? Like social media is you got to understand the tool it can be, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Put together a lot of put together a lot of great conversations for myself, but you also have to understand the dangers that are so right there, right? Like, I mean, it's
a brand new world where anyone in the whole world now has access to our kids. And it's teen influencers as well, really affecting these other kids. And not every kid comes from a great family, of course, and some of their parents, a lot of these parents are great. These kids are coming from all sorts of socioeconomic backgrounds, but sometimes these kids are just ignored,
Yeah.
And they're finding their love online. And so kids need to come to an understanding on their own of why social media isn't the best thing for them. It's not good for your mental health. It's hard for me. I put up with abuse on the daily, all sorts of crazy stuff. I won't even get into it all. But, it's hard even for adults to deal with. You have to have a thick skin. For kids, next to impossible.
Well, everybody wants to be liked, loved, right? And nobody wants to be hated on. It's maybe one of the most uncomfortable feelings in the world to just be disowned or, for your thoughts or your views and I mean, in society right now, that is on full stage for everyone to view, see. It's, this COVID thing has infected every family down to the bone. And we're seeing it on full, like the things that are plaguing our society right now are on another level. And it is the brave new world. And we got some giant issues. But at the same time, I go, every generation that came before us had their issues. Yeah. And the adults need to be put on their big boy pants or girl pants and tackle them. Stand up for your beliefs. Because if we don't, we're seeing what we're leaving our children, and it is a lot of burden, and they're all going to stare at us and go, what on earth were you guys all doing?
Yes, now, they are. In 20 years, we're all going to be going, what the heck?
Yeah.
How did we all let this happen? But all these politicians today have bought into this. We have activists that get elected, activists run for school boards. It's a huge thing to undo this politically or in our schools right now. What we need to do is in jurisdictions where this isn't being taught, those parents need to stand up before it gets in there. So like BC is pretty much lost. We've got this program called SOGI 123 all throughout our 60 school districts. The same program is in all of the Edmonton school districts, but it hasn't expanded to the rest of Alberta. Well, their goal is to get this exact program throughout Canada. Ontario's getting deeper and deeper into this. They used to not teach gender identity until grade 8. Now they're teaching it from kindergarten on up.
You hit the right show,
So
Chris, because,
yeah,
I'm small town Alberta, Saskatchewan, right?
yeah,
Uh, the fact I don't know about this shouldn't really surprise too many people because some days I live under a rock. But that means, a lot of my listeners are sitting in the same spot going, geez, I didn't realize that. Better,
yeah.
you know, better take a look into that before it gets out of hand.
And it's hitting the small towns in the prairies too. I've been to Calgary and Edmonton 3 or 4 times, and I've met with parents from small towns who came to see me. And it's universities too, like when your kid's 17, 18 and they go off to university, especially for the girls. Whew, that's where this ideology is reaching fever pitch. It's big time in all the universities. And no matter what town you're in, even if this isn't getting taught in your school, if your kids are on social media, they're getting exposed
Yeah.
to this. And it's just in the culture at large. And like you mentioned, celebrity culture as well. And that has a big influence. Unfortunately, celebrities have a big influence on our kids. Pop culture is what they're into, and they're all
Well,
pushing
pop,
this.
pop,
Yeah.
me and you weren't, we were affected by pop culture all growing up as well, right? Like, I mean, just not in the same way.
Yeah. We didn't have Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Prince telling us that we could be born in the wrong body, right? Prince, if he were around today, he's your classic example of a non-binary pop star. He'd for sure be saying he was non-binary, which means you're not male or female. That's just like a trend. It's just rejecting stereotypes. You don't have to be non-binary to reject stereotypes. You can wear pink. Hey, look at you. That's more salmon colored.
It's
But
salmon. I'm glad you got
yeah,
that. Hey,
yeah,
I'm glad. Yeah. All right. Hey.
yeah. But this whole thing is insane, and we just need to get the conversations going. And so you asked, what is the solution for this? So my thing is, I'm not trying to change the laws of the land or to change school district policies or any of that, because that's not my hat. I am reaching one parent at a time, because when they learn what's going on, then they can protect their kids. And that's my job done. So every day I'm out there having conversations, and every day I'm having these conversations, I'm winning. Because the more people who learn what's going on, then they can protect their own kids. And they're going to have more conversations with their friends and so forth. But this comes down to literally one conversation at a time, one kid at a time. And I believe that a groundswell will eventually form as more and more people speak out. And then maybe lawyers will start wearing their hats and they can sue. And then maybe one day some politicians aren't so cowardly and they feel like they have more support behind them to stand up to this trans lobby. And maybe one day they'll find a shred of courage. But right now, they're a lost cause. So this is just good old fashioned grassroots taking it straight to people. And we're going to win this battle eventually because it's too insane to continue. It's simply a matter of how many kids are going to be harmed in the interim. So I'm trying to shorten that timeline and do my part to inform these parents. And I'll never know about the good that's coming from it because we're never going to hear about these bad stories because they'll never have happened.
The listener can't see me because I'm smiling at you, but I'm smiling because, if there's anything the last few years has taught me is, good Canadian boy. Politician says something, let's go do it and let's do our part and whatever else. Man, that's come to a halt. Politicians, I thought the Bill Clinton who could say I didn't have sexual relations and then, oh, wait, I did. And that wasn't a big deal. But if me and you do that, let me tell you, that's a big deal, right? To lie under oath. To me, if there's been things that have come just clear over the last little bit as politicians, man, there's some that are they're weight in gold, but they're probably not a politician right now because they've probably been ousted because of the stances they've taken over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And then there's politicians, they say one thing, next day they're doing a different thing. I've had lawyers basically say you can't win. There's no point in trying. Are you a lawyer? Are you like, what is that mantra? Right? Like, since when was that the West? The West was not won. The West was not colonized off the idea of, oh, we can't do it. Let's just go home.
Right.
Actually, I would say my ancestors went through some of the harshest climate. Heck, we just survived 30 3 straight weeks of some of the harshest climate this planet has to offer. It was like minus 43 every bloody day. It was awful. You can imagine having 3 young kids trapped inside every day. That's what we do here. That's just life. That's the people we have here. And if people understood more of the power they hold, right? Like how strong each of them are for choosing to live in this part of the world, man, like nothing's impossible in my mind. So I smile not because of what you're saying, but because in the past, for sure, year, if not couple of years, it's been a realization that, man, I put a lot of faith in our politicians. They've been letting me down. Put a lot of faith in a lot of lawyers. They've been letting me down. Some have really held it up their end of the bargain. And I just see more and more. I go back to what you said right at the start. I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm a nobody. Well, there's a lot of nobodies that are starting to do some real good things, that are standing for their values and what they believe in. And I think that's pretty honorable, right? You believe in something. I have, wow, and it'll slide in. This is a nice segue into the Crude Master final question here for you. Heath McDonald, shout out to Heath and Tracy McDonald. They've been supporters of the podcast since the beginning. I had him on, and he said, if you believe in something, stand behind it. And I look at a man like yourself, just a nobody, as you would say, and I see a guy standing behind something he believes in. And I think that's the way you get movements happening, right? That's what movements look for. They want somebody who is willing to take the shrapnel for them and speak the truth and go into places where hate is going to be directed at you. Your arm's going to be broken. You're going to be attacked. You're going to be all these awful things of the human nature that, like it's the complete opposite of humanity, right? Like it's just the bad side. And when you are willing to do that, I think there will be a swell behind you of people that want to support you. You've probably already seen it. You've probably already seen that.
Yeah, it's increasing. And I do need it because doing what I'm doing requires help.
How do people find?
Billboardchris.com. I'm on Twitter. That's where I do most of my campaigning. I've joined Getter now as well. And I'm on some other social networks, but it's at Billboardchris on Twitter. That's where I do all my campaigning. I've got a donate button on my website. If people can donate, that'd be really helpful, because traveling around North America, and I'm going to the States now a lot because I get bigger media there, way bigger podcasters, and we're going to need their help because they're way more active in fighting this. The parents down there are way more active.
Well, because they're more, listen, we're seeing it
with
it's just
everything. Totally different.
The United
States
have
conservative media. We don't have any.
Yeah, the United States is disagreeable. Just simple as that. Yeah. Just
right.
Leave it at that. We're all uncomfortable. Listen, what you're talking about, I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh, right? It's just my Canadian roots. I've been built to just go along to get along and treat your neighbor as you'd have him treat you and everything else, and to expect the best out of our politicians and everyone else or everything. And right now, what you're talking about doesn't surprise me. The United States is doing what it's doing. We're seeing what they're doing on all issues, right? If they don't believe in something, they have the belief it is their God-given right to explain their thoughts and to take their position. Canadians have the same bloody thing, maybe not identical in the documents, but our Constitution, people from all over the world move here because of it, right?
Yeah.
It's giving us something that other people in different, parts of the world do not have. And we just have all forgotten it. It's as simple as that. And we need to realize that.
Our country has a great foundation. We have a good charter of rights and freedoms. We have everything there to just boom and to be hugely successful. But we have terrible people running our country. And that's not, I don't even mean that as a political statement. Just look at what's happening. Look at what they turn a blind eye to. They're turning a blind eye to this. And in fact, they're pushing this on kids. They're captured ideologically. And our media is captured ideologically. It's captured financially as well, because they'd all be bankrupt if not for the help from the federal government.
Yeah.
But CBC, CTV, and Global all push this narrative. And we don't have any conservative media in Canada to tell people the truth. So where do Canadians get the truth from on this? Well, increasingly, they get it from people like yourself. We get it from podcasts. the Joe Rogans of the world, conservative news in the US. We'll cover the other side of the story.
Yes, they will. But
And it's independent journalists now with Substack and things like that.
Here's the thing
so
I would
we
say
just need
about
to keep talking.
Here's the thing I would say about Canadians. I'm speaking to Canadians right now. I'm listen. The first podcast I ever listened to was Joe Rogan. It's why I do my format this way. It's that's why I get compared. Now, obviously, I'm on the very low end of it, Chris. I don't mean it to even put me in the same realm, but you understand. The thing is, here in Canada, we got to figure out how to get the best of us on different shows, and it's coming. Like, this network is building. It's building faster and faster and faster because there's no, all we have is CBC. I mean, and the Global and whatever else. But you're right. We literally, one of our biggest problems we have in Canada is we listen to the US and think it's happening in Canada, right? Oh, they're really fighting it. No, we're not. No, we're not. We're Canada. We're docile. We're just like, yeah. No. Now, are things starting to change? Absolutely. And do I mean to the people, go run into your school and start yelling at some teachers? No, I do not. I just mean you need to get informed. You need to start having discussions. You need to take part in your kids' lives. You need to understand what's actually happening in our government, right? With our leaders. And then maybe we can start to change some of this. Because if we listen to all you listen to is the Joe Rogans of the world, it's awesome. He's informative as all get up. I love it. But he's talking about America. He's not talking about Canada. He stares at Canada. Half the Americans stare at Canada and go, what on earth is going there? Well, that's us. That's all of us. And we got to figure out a way to become the country that we were. We are. It's still sitting there. We just got to pick up, we just got to get involved in the game and carry on with life.
Yeah, we still have democracy. We still get to vote. But democracy is also pretty dead in Canada because, for example, if I wanted to run as an MP and I wanted to run for a party that has a good chance of winning, like the Conservative Party, you kind of need to be in one of the big parties to win. So next to impossible as an independent to win. But for example, the Conservative Party would never accept me as a candidate.
So are you saying it's hopeless then?
No, but we need to vote these guys out. We need to first create awareness in Canada. We need to point out how terrible these politicians are, how corrupt they are. We're going to need a brave leader somehow within those parties to rise up and start talking common sense again. Because these people are all cowards. I see Pierre Poilievre gets a lot of praise. He voted for this bill. He won't have conversations about it. They're all afraid. A lot of them know better, but they're afraid. Derek Sloan did speak out against these issues, and Aaron O'Toole booted him out of the party. So it's a big problem, but we just got to create awareness right now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, to me, I think there's a lot of, I've met some good politicians, or what I believe to be good politicians. And I think there has to be, one of the things Shane Getson told me once upon a time was politicians do the public's bidding and public opinion is swayed by media. So what we're doing here is informing the public, and public, if they change their opinion, then politicians get to do what they do and change things, which you wish it wasn't so easy of a solution, right? You get the right leaders in, they just change. And maybe they can. Maybe you have the Winston Churchill standing there and he's kind of like the wall that the waves crash on and he never backs down. And maybe
we don't have a Winston Churchill though.
Well, Aaron O'Toole dancing around you on a street is laughable. Laughable. If you see Billboardchris coming, man, to me, that's a caricature in a newspaper. Oh, Billboard's around the corner. There's Chris, and there's Aaron O'Toole running. Well, that's that's our official opposition. Like, all Canadians should listen to that and go, oh, like, we got a problem, right? I'm trying to figure out where the problem, I go back to Jordan Peterson, write the worst case scenario, write the best case scenario. Now you understand how bad it can get. that can motivate you to create the best case scenario, essentially, right? And right now, I listen to what you're saying. I listen to different politicians. I go here, I go there, and I go, well, we're doing something here. You're certainly doing something. I'm curious how we do more to enact things that can enact change so the world can become better. And that's my version of better, and I understand that. But to me, I feel like there's a lot of people that we're pretty quiet. We just want to go, we want to go to work. We want to put food on the table. We want a holiday every once in a while. We want to be around our kids, and we just rinse and repeat. And that's been life over life. And I just feel like the way things are going, I'm not so certain that if we continue that trend, we get that in the next 50 years and it doesn't mothball into something else.
Well, Marxism, we'll get on another subject, but it's here and it's in our politics. And they've rebranded it as equity, where everyone ends up with the same outcome.
Yeah.
So in real life, how this looks is what the Vancouver School Board just did, which is take away all the gifted programs for all the gifted students. These programs didn't impede any other kids. It's just the gifted kids who needed a challenge had challenge programs that were available to them to increase their knowledge and their skills. They took it all away because it's not equitable. That's what's going on throughout Canadian society. And yeah, we do need to get these politicians out of there. So hopefully that happens one day. They need to start by getting rid of Aaron O'Toole, and the Conservative Party needs a whole rebranding, because the Liberal Party, the NDP Party, they're gone. They are a lost cause. They're a total lost cause. I've spoken to politicians here. I walked into the NDP headquarters during our provincial election campaign, where they were campaigning out of. And I spoke to this politician named Grace Lore for 10 minutes. As my luck would have it, she won her riding in Victoria. As my luck would have it, she's actually a former professor of gender studies at UVic. So this is a gender ideologue who then ran for politics, and now she's one of our MLAs. But I spoke to her for 10 minutes about all these things going on. I laid out all the things happening to kids. I got into the women's rights issues. I got into how we are even sending rapists into women's prisons. Here in the Fraser Valley, there's a man who raped a 9-month-old boy who required reconstructive surgery, and he drowned a 3-year-old boy. The government paid for him to get fake boobs and sent him into the women's prison.
You cannot make up something that horrific and stupid all at the same fucking time.
So I was talking in this NDP headquarters, and Grace Lore was listening. And then the person beside her started listening. And one by one, every person in this room fell silent, about 10 NDP members. And they just let me roll for like 10 minutes. I got to the part about sending rapists into women's prisons, and a woman stopped me, kicked me out. She said that I was making them feel unsafe, that they had to make it a safe space. This is code word. This is what they always say. We feel unsafe. As soon as you say something that is an uncomfortable truth, they'll say, oh, we need to make this a safe space, or we feel unsafe. And they booted me out. And I just laid out all that. And I talked about this rapist going into the women's prison. I didn't even get into all the details. I walked outside. I looked through the window as I was walking back to my car. They were all in there laughing. The next morning, I came back to see the education minister, Rob Fleming. He was in there. They'd locked me out. And they'd hung overnight, they'd hung the transgender flag underneath his political poster. So they just learned about all that going on. And their response was to double down. And on social media, Grace Lore, even after hearing about this rapist in the women's prison, her response directly to that sort of tweet was to say that she stands with the transgender community. None of them can admit that maybe we shouldn't be sending rapists into women's prisons. None of them can admit that we shouldn't be sterilizing kids. If I ask them, do you think it's okay that we're sterilizing children? They just try to change the subject. And I don't let them. I keep bringing it back to that. And maybe after the third or fourth or fifth time asking, I'll get people to say, Well, no, obviously we shouldn't be sterilizing kids, but we're not doing that, they say. Oh, really? Well, here's the president-elect of the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, Dr. Marcy Bowers, who is herself a trans woman. She herself, or he, will tell you this. Laura Edwards-Leeper, another senior official at WPATH, has just written an op-ed that the New York Times rejected because there was too much truth in it, but the Washington Post finally ran with it, and she's blowing the whistle on all these abuses going on. This isn't just me. There's another senior official with the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, just had an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle. Same stuff. But how all these kids are getting rushed into this, and it's not right. But no one will listen. So people listen, and more than 90% of the population agree with us. I know that because I've talked to 5,000 people out on the street, people from all walks of life. I've been out on the street 200 times for hours at a time. Talk. I've talked to everyone. And easily more than 90% of people agree right away. They all know it's nuts. But we don't have democracy because we aren't represented. They're just pushing an agenda. Mm. And so these politicians are useless. We need to get rid of them one day. But right now, all we can literally do is just raise awareness. And as we raise awareness, we are saving kids. So thank you, Sean, for doing your part today, my man. Hopefully we can do some more in the future.
Absolutely. Well, here before I let you go, I got to the crude master, and then I didn't ask the actual question that I always ask. So here's the question before I let you go. If you could sit down with somebody like this to pick their brain, who would you take?
Justin Trudeau.
You think that'd have any impact?
No, because he's a coward. But I mean, we should talk to the leaders. I've talked to my MP in the parking lot at Save On Foods a couple months ago, ran into her. She sat on the Justice Committee reviewing Bill C6, which turned into Bill C4, this conversion therapy bill. She listened to all the people testify. Something like 400 or 500 briefs were submitted to the Justice Committee on this, most of them against the bill. Just before the Senate approved this bill a few weeks ago, I know of one organization that sent over 400 emails to all of the senators about this. They ignore it all. But I refuse to believe that a parent, and Justin Trudeau is a parent. Now he's a special case, but come on. If we outline just the facts of this matter and get into it in detail over a couple hours, how can anyone agree with what's happening to these kids? These people need a way to save face because they're cowards at heart. They need a way to save face. So eventually how this is going to play out is other countries are going to start banning this practice. Different states are doing it right now. Texas, the Attorney General is investigating a couple companies that sell these drugs, saying that they advertise an off-label drug, which is what they're doing. And so it's not approved for this purpose, and they're going after them on that route. But other countries are going to fix this before Canada, and only then will people like Justin Trudeau say, oh, you know what? We've discovered that there's been some abuse going on, and so we're going to put an end to it. And he's going to present himself like this savior. But if all these people truly knew what was happening and couldn't ignore it, they would act. So we need things like documentaries. We need a documentary series where we sit down with a detransitioner each week and we just tell her story or his story of how they were rushed through the system, got their breasts cut off, got their uterus removed. We need a documentary series that reaches a bunch of people. In Sweden, they have a documentary series. If you Google Sweden trans documentary series, you'll find it. And directly correlating with when this documentary aired, the number of kids going to gender clinics fell off a cliff. because the people in Sweden all saw this documentary and became aware of what was going on. So media like that is hugely powerful.
Well, once again, you inform your public, it's going to change things, right? All
So
of
I'm
us
working on a couple
assume.
documentaries right now,
Yeah, I
but we
would,
need more.
I would argue with you on your sit down with Justin Trudeau. I feel like anything
Okay.
at this point is like water off a duck's back. I don't think he's. I don't know where that guy is anymore.
Yeah,
He
I
was
agree.
never anywhere, anyways. But I have zero time for him, other than he represents us on the global stage. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
After that, the words that come out of his mouth, some of the things he said about the population in the last year alone, just hurts my brain.
Oh yeah,
And
he's awful.
and
He's a
he,
liar.
well, and the thing is, he's not alone. There's a ton of politicians, a lot of them in Ottawa, that
Yeah.
that say one thing, do another thing. We've talked an awful lot about that. Now, I don't want to keep you the rest of the night here. I do appreciate you coming on. This is it's got my brain thinking, and I'm gonna have to chew on some things here, which is a good thing. That's exactly what I hope to do when I sit down with people, is walk away going, man, now I got to think about this, right? But I do appreciate you giving me some of your time, Chris, and I hope some people will search you out at billboardchris.com if they want to get more information, if they want to donate, that type of thing. Regardless, thanks, sir, for giving me some of your time. If you're ever through the Lloydminster area, you make sure to drop me a note.
I will do. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And yeah, if people want to reach out to me, my contact info is also on my website. If anyone wants to have me on their podcast or reach out to me, just ask me any questions. That's what I do. This is my job now. So I say yes to everything. And thank you so much for helping reach your audience. Please do check out my website. Please do support me if you can, because I need it. But we'll get there in the end. And I look forward to talking to you again, my man. Thank you.
Awesome.